My name is Azira. This story begins back in 1968. I was 35 years old at that time. I seemed too old to start from scratch, but I was too young to understand that life still had so much to teach me. I met Robert in 1955 at a neighborhood party. He was a handsome man with dark hair, well-groomed. He worked as a manager at a fabric store. He had a smile that made the neighborhood women come talk to him. My father liked him immediately. My mother did too. You know how it is, right? When parents approve, we think we've found the right person. We got married a year later in 1956. I was 23 years old. I wore a white dress that my mother had sewn for 3 months. I had a garland of white flowers in my hair. I was a happy woman that day. I believed I had found my place in the world. I believed that marriage was forever, that Robert would love me until the end of life, that we would grow old together, holding each other's hands. In the first 10 years of marriage, life was normal. We had 3 children. Paul was born in 1957, Marina in 1959, and Julius in 1962. We lived in a small 3-room house in the suburbs of Chicago. I had a backyard where I planted tomatoes and lettuce. I had a gas stove where I cooked every day. I did laundry for other families in the neighborhood. I earned a little extra money to help with the bills. Robert brought in the main income. He left home early in a suit and tie. He came back in the late afternoon, tired from work. We were a normal family, nothing extraordinary, but it was honest, it was real. But everything started to change in 1968. I'll never forget that year. Robert started to become different, more distant. He who used to come home and give me a hug in front of the children started coming home silent, disconnected. He would pass by me as if I wasn't there. He would pass by the children the same way. He would enter the bedroom, lock the door, and sometimes sleep before we had dinner. I thought it was work fatigue. Back then, we didn't have psychologists. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't go to therapy. We kept everything inside and suffered in silence. That's how women did it. We got used to it, we took a deep breath and moved forward. Then it started with the outings. He started going out at night, always with a different excuse. He said he had a business meeting with clients from the store. He said he was going to a co-worker's house to discuss business expansion. He said he had to resolve some pending matters at the store, always with a justification that seemed plausible. How could a woman question her husband about business if she didn't understand business? This was frequent, maybe 2-3 times a week. Every week there were 2 or 3 days when he would leave at 7:30 at night. Always 7:30. It was like clockwork. I learned to recognize that time. I would see him getting ready, looking at himself in the mirror, combing that dark hair he took very good care of, and then simply leave. And when he came back drunk. He wasn't an aggressive man when he drank, no. He didn't hit me, didn't yell. He became even more quiet, more closed off. He would enter the house, go straight to the bedroom, lie down and sleep deeply. But it wasn't a peaceful sleep. It was a heavy sleep, forced, of someone who drank too much. And with that heavy sleep came the snoring. My God, that snoring is no exaggeration, no. It sounded like a train passing through the house. It sounded like a car engine that wouldn't turn off. It woke up the whole neighborhood. My children complained that they couldn't sleep. I put cotton in their ears, tried to solve it any way I could. So, we developed a natural pattern. On the days I knew Robert was going out at night, that he was going to come back drunk, that snoring was going to be impossible to bear, I myself decided to go sleep in the living room. Not out of anger, not out of desperation, simply for survival. I needed to sleep, and he wouldn't let me sleep with that infernal snoring. I would take a pillow, a sheet, a blanket we had, and settle on the old sofa that was in the living room. It was a worn brown sofa we had gotten from one of Robert's uncles. Its legs made noise when we moved, but it was better than the snoring. At first, I thought it was a relief. Finally, I could sleep without that horrible noise in my ear. Finally, I could really rest. It seemed like I had found a solution. But as time passed, as months turned into years, I started to notice strange things, small things that seem silly when you talk about them. but when you're living inside the house, when you're living it, they seem gigantic. I started to notice a strange smell on his clothes, a smell that wasn't ours. It wasn't the sweat smell I knew too well. It wasn't the smell of the cheap cigarettes he smoked that I was used to since the first day of marriage. It was a different smell. It was a sweet smell, a feminine perfume, a perfume I didn't wear. I wasn't a sophisticated woman. I didn't wear expensive perfume. I used soap that had a light scent, nothing more. The smell I felt on Robert's clothes was from a French perfume, one of those expensive ones that cost a lot and that rich women wore. It wasn't something any woman used back then. Back then, French perfume was luxury. The first time I smelled that scent, I thought maybe it was my mistake. Maybe it was a new detergent I was using to wash clothes. Maybe it was something Robert had touched at the store, but it wasn't. It was very obvious. It was embedded in his shirt, in his pants, even in the tie he wore when going out. This smell started appearing every week. Every week I would find a piece of his clothing embedded with that strange perfume. I would pick up his shirt to wash, and that smell would come straight to my nostrils. I would pick up his pants, the same thing, and he acted as if nothing was happening. He simply pretended I didn't exist. I started to pay more attention. I started to notice other small things that indicated a pattern. We had a wall clock in the kitchen, a wooden clock with Roman numerals that Robert's father had given him. I started to notice that Robert always left at the same time, 7:30 at night, always 7:30 sharp. It was as if he had a schedule arranged with someone, and he always came back around 2 in the morning, 2 o'clock at night sharp. I could hear when he arrived because I was in the living room sleeping lightly, that sleep that isn't real sleep, it was more like a nap. You become sensitive to any noise when you're worried about something. When your heart is racing, you can't sleep deeply. So I could hear when he came home, could hear the door closing back there, could hear his footsteps in the hallway, could hear when he entered the bedroom. And it was precisely at that moment, at that magical hour of 2 in the morning, that smell reached the living room. That perfume passed through the entire house like an invisible wave. It invaded my room, invaded my bed, mixed with my sheets, with my personal things. And I was there on the old living room sofa, breathing that smell that wasn't mine, breathing an aroma that indicated that my husband was with another woman, that another woman was sleeping in my bed, that I was being betrayed inside my own house. This lasted 6 years, 6 whole years from 1968 to 1973, 6 years waking up with that strange smell in the house, 6 years seeing those clothes embedded with perfume, 6 years knowing that something was deeply wrong, but without having concrete proof, without having anything but my woman's intuition. And back then, a woman's intuition was worth absolutely nothing. If I talked to a friend about this, she would tell me I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I had unfounded jealousy. If I talked to my husband about that strange smell, he would call me crazy. He would say I was a hysterical woman, that I didn't even know how to wash clothes properly. So I kept it all inside me, deep down. I suffered in silence. I did what women did back then. I fulfilled my role, raised my children, kept my house clean, kept my marriage standing. I started to lose weight. My children noticed. My Paul, who was 10, 11 years old at the time, asked why Mom didn't eat anymore. Marina, who was more attentive, said I was very nervous, that it was bad for the whole house. Julius was still small, didn't understand anything. I had to pretend normalcy, pretend everything was fine, pretend I didn't know anything, pretend my marriage wasn't falling apart. I started having insomnia even lying on the sofa. I stayed awake all night thinking about who this woman was, thinking if it was someone I knew, thinking about how this was possible, how he could do this to me, how he could look me in the face the next day and pretend normalcy. I started observing my friends, all the friends I had. I tried to remember which of them wore French perfume, which of them would have the courage to do such a horrible thing, which of them would betray a friend that way. My body started giving signals. I started having frequent headaches, pains that lasted hours. I started having stomach problems. I couldn't eat properly. I lost 15 pounds in a few months. My mother came to visit me and almost cried when she saw me like that. She asked if I was well, if Robert was treating me well, if there was any problem she could help with. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't say that my husband was cheating on me. I couldn't say that I was a deceived woman, because that was shame. That was humiliation. That was something we didn't talk to anyone about. We kept it to ourselves. So I lied to my mother. I said it was stress. I said I had financial worries. I said it was women's stuff. She believed. Mothers always believe the lies their children tell, because they also keep their secrets. That perfume continued appearing every week, every damn week, like a ghost, like a haunting, that reminded me every day that I wasn't enough, that my husband had found something better, that I was being replaced. And the worst of all was that I didn't know what to do. It was early 1973 when I finally reached my limit. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping properly. I would see Robert in the morning and somehow manage to live normally, do routine things, but inside I was being eaten alive by a doubt that had no answer. Back then, there weren't cameras like today. It wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't just taking a cell phone and filming, it was much more complicated. But I had a cousin who worked with professional photography. He did weddings, baptisms, birthday parties, and he had a special camera, a camera that could be programmed to take photos in automatic sequence without needing anyone pressing the button. I went to talk to him. I didn't tell the whole truth. I couldn't. I just said I needed to photograph something in my house and that it was something discreet. He didn't ask questions. I think he sensed something. I think he saw in my look that I was suffering. He lent me the camera, taught me how it worked, and didn't charge anything. That camera had a mechanism that worked with a timer. You put the camera in a place, adjusted the timer to take photos every 5 minutes, and that was it. It would take photos automatically, without needing anyone nearby. The photos were in black and white. He gave me 2 rolls of film, enough for quite a lot. I spent 2 whole days thinking about where to put that camera. It couldn't be in an obvious place. It couldn't be in a place where Robert could see. It had to be in a place where it could capture the entire bedroom. It had to be discreet, but it had to show everything. I thought about putting it on top of the wardrobe. I thought about putting it behind a door. I thought about putting it under the bed. I finally decided to put the camera on a shelf behind some books that was in the corner of the bedroom, well disguised. There it could capture the bedroom door, the hallway, and the entire bed. But before that, before anything, I needed a plan. I needed to be sure that he was going to come back on a specific night, bringing someone. So I spent an entire week observing his pattern. I wrote down on a small paper when he left, what he said before leaving, how he was dressed. I noticed that every Tuesday and every Thursday, he was more likely to go out. Tuesday and Thursday were the days he came back with more perfume smell. Tuesday and Thursday were the days that aroma invaded the entire house, so I chose a Tuesday. The Tuesday of February 27th, 1973. I'll never forget that date. That Tuesday marked my destiny. On the morning of that day, I put the camera in place. My heart beat so hard, I thought I was going to faint. My hands were shaking. I was afraid that Robert would come home at that moment and catch me with that camera in my hand. I didn't know what I was going to say. I put the camera well hidden behind those old books that nobody read. I adjusted the timer to take photos every 5 minutes. I tested to make sure it was working, everything ready. At night, when Robert came home from work, I couldn't look into his eyes. I pretended to read a newspaper in the living room while he had dinner. My children talked normally, didn't notice anything. Thank God children don't notice these things. They live in their small world, don't perceive what's happening around them. When 7:30 came, he got up, got ready as he always did, combed his hair, put on that cologne he used, put on the tie I had sewn, and left the house saying he had an important meeting at the store. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake the whole time, sitting on the living room sofa waiting to hear the sound of a car arriving, waiting to hear the door opening, waiting to hear those footsteps in the hallway, and at 2:10, then I heard. I heard everything. I heard when he arrived. I heard when he entered the house with someone. I heard footsteps of two people, not one. I heard when that person laughed. Laughed in a way that cut my heart. It was a familiar laugh, very familiar. My body was paralyzed. My chest was tight. I could hear every movement. I heard when they entered the bedroom. I heard when the door closed. I heard when my bed started making noise, and at that moment, at that exact moment, the camera was taking photos. Automatically every 5 minutes, capturing everything. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the sofa listening to everything. Let me make something clear. There are sounds that a woman can never get out of her memory. There are sounds that are recorded forever. And I heard all of them that night. After 2 hours, he left the bedroom with someone. The person went down the stairs with him. I could hear the footsteps going down. I heard when they opened the front door. I heard when someone got into a car outside. I heard when the car left, and I was left there sitting on the sofa alone, with my heart broken into pieces. I couldn't really sleep that night. I just lay there, awake, thinking about what had happened, thinking about who that woman was, because I had recognized that laugh. I knew that laugh very well. The next day, when Robert woke up and left for work, I ran to the bedroom. I took the camera from behind the books with trembling hands. I put the film back in the camera, as my cousin had taught me, and went straight to his house. He developed the film for me. I sat in a dark room while he manipulated the film, while he processed those images. I couldn't breathe properly. I didn't know if I wanted to see that. But at the same time, I needed to know. I needed to confirm. When he put the photos in front of me, I fell. I literally fell. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. They were clear photos, black and white photos, very clear. Photos of my bedroom door opening, photos of two people entering the bedroom. Photos of photos I couldn't look at for long because my heart was going to explode. And the worst of all photos, one where you could clearly see the face of who was with my husband. A photo where the light from the door reached that face I knew so well. It was Fernanda, my best friend, my friend of 22 years. We had met in 1951 at a church party. She was a beautiful girl, had long brown hair, big eyes. We became friends right away. Real friends, the kind you tell your secrets to, the kind you trust blindly. She was the maid of honor at my wedding with Robert. Maid of honor. She was there when I said, "Yes, I do." She applauded when the priest declared us husband and wife. She ate cake at my wedding, smiling at my face, and for 6 years she was sleeping with my husband. My cousin offered me a glass of water. I didn't drink. He offered a chair for me to sit. My legs were too weak. He tried to talk to me, and I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe properly. Those photos stayed with me. I felt their weight in my purse. I felt the weight of those photographic truths. Because a photo doesn't lie. A photo cannot be questioned. There was the truth, in black and white. I left my cousin's house in a state of shock. I walked through the city streets, not knowing where I was going. My legs carried me automatically. My mind was empty, or maybe it was very full, so full that it couldn't process anything. I remember stopping under a tree and vomiting. Everything I had eaten that week came out of my stomach. I vomited until I had nothing left. I stayed there crouched under a tree, crying in a way I didn't know was possible to cry, because it wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just my husband cheating on me. It was my best friend. It was someone I had invited to every one of my children's birthdays. Someone who had given them gifts, someone I considered like a sister. 6 years. 6 years those two were doing that. 6 years that woman hugged me, kissed my cheek, talked to me about life while sleeping with my husband in my own bed. I went home after sitting under that tree for hours. When I got there, Robert hadn't come back from work yet. My children were at school. I went to the bedroom, to my bedroom, my sacred corner, the place I thought was only mine, and lay on the bed. I smelled that French perfume, Fernanda's smell. I smelled it on the pillowcases. I smelled it on the sheets. I tore off the sheets with force, wanted to burn everything, wanted to erase all that aroma. I took the photos and looked at each one of them. I looked at Fernanda's face. She was so comfortable, so natural, so as if that was her right, as if she had conquered what was mine, as if she had won a competition I didn't know was happening. And I looked at Robert's face, also comfortable, also natural, also happy. That was the face of the man I had chosen to spend my entire life with. That was the face of the person who promised to love me until death do us part. And he was there in those photos, clearly betraying me with my best friend. I kept the photos in a safe place. I put them under the mattress. I couldn't let anyone find them. If the children found them, no, I couldn't. My secret kept under the mattress, my truth buried. When Robert came home that night, he smiled at me as if nothing had happened, as if that Tuesday was a normal day. He asked me how my day had been. I lied. I said it had been a common day, that I had washed clothes, that I had cooked. He had dinner, read the newspaper, watched some television, and went to sleep. Sleep in the bed where he had been with Fernanda. Sleep in the place that was sacred to me. And I stayed awake all night, sitting on the living room sofa, with the photos in my hand, finally, with the proof. Finally, with the confirmation of everything I knew in my bones. Finally, I had the truth. Those photos stayed under my mattress for 5 years. 5 whole years. I looked at them every night when Robert slept. I took them out, looked at each one, and then put them back. It was as if I needed to confirm every night that it was real, that it wasn't a nightmare, that my husband was really cheating on me. But you know what's worse than discovering a betrayal? It's having to live in the same room with it. It's having to share the same bed. It's having to wake up next to that man every day, because I couldn't leave home. Not back then. Where was a 40-year-old woman going to go? I didn't have money saved. I didn't have anywhere to live. I had 3 children who needed me. And divorce. Divorce was practically impossible in 1973. It was public humiliation. People pointed at you on the street. You became a discarded, inadequate woman. So I did what every woman in that situation did. I remained. I remained in the house. I remained silent. I remained in the lie. In the first months after discovering about Fernanda, I tried to confront Robert. I sat at the kitchen table when the children were sleeping, put the photos in front of him, and asked for explanations. He didn't deny, didn't try to apologize, didn't cry asking for forgiveness. He just looked at those photos as if he was seeing anything else, with indifference, with coldness, and then told me that it wasn't my business, that I was being a controlling woman, that he was a man and had the right to do what he wanted. Then he took the photos, tore them one by one right in front of me, smiling at me while he tore them. Smiling. That image stays with me to this day. His smile while he destroyed the evidence. I didn't scream, didn't grab anything to hit. I simply felt my body get cold. I felt as if a part of me was dying, because at that moment I understood. He had no shame. He didn't care about my feelings. He didn't love me. Maybe he never had. After that, life became even more of a hell, because now he knew that I knew that I had seen the photos, knew that I had confirmation of all that, and even so, he continued going out. Every Tuesday and every Thursday he would get up, get ready, and leave. And I knew exactly where he was going. I knew exactly who he was with, but I couldn't do anything. Absolutely nothing. I started seeing Fernanda on the street. It was inevitable. The town was small. I would go to the supermarket and run into her in line. She would smile at me as if nothing was happening, as if we were real friends, as if she wasn't sleeping with my husband. Once she had the courage to come to my house. Yes, that woman entered my house knowing that I knew. She entered as if she had every right in the world. She hugged my children, asked how they were doing in school. My children liked her, had no idea what she was doing. I served her tea, served cake that I myself had made. I talked to her as if nothing was happening, because my children were there, because the neighborhood could be watching, because we can't simply explode when we want in society. After she left, I vomited everything in the toilet. I vomited the tea. I vomited the cake. I vomited the humiliation of having to pretend friendship with a woman who was betraying me. My body started to disappear, not in a visible way at first, but it disappeared. I was just skin and bones. My face became wrinkled. My hair started turning white faster than it should. People on the street commented that I looked sick, that they were sure I had something serious, that I should go to the doctor. I didn't go to the doctor because the doctor would ask what was happening, and how was I going to explain? How could I say that my heart was broken, that my husband was cheating on me, that my best friend was the other woman? The children started to notice the changes. They noticed that I didn't eat with them. They noticed that I spent nights awake. Paul, my oldest son, was about 17, 18 years old at that time, started to suspect something. One night, he asked me if everything was okay with Dad, if there was any problem. My son was offering to listen to my problems, and I couldn't tell. I couldn't unload that weight on a child's shoulders. So I lied again. I said everything was fine. I said they were just marriage things every woman goes through, that it was normal to feel these ups and downs. I made my son believe that his mother was well when she was falling apart inside. Marina was more sensitive. She felt my feelings without me needing to tell anything. She would come, sit next to me, and simply hug me without asking, without demanding explanations. She knew something was wrong and tried to console her mother in the only way a child can. And that hug of hers broke me even more, because I had to be strong for her. I had to be that mother who endures everything, who doesn't cry, who doesn't fall apart. I had to be invincible. For 5 years, I slept in the same bed as Robert. 5 years after discovering the photos. 5 years pretending I was sleeping when actually I was awake, listening to every breath of his. 5 years refusing to accept his touch, but having to explain why, without revealing the truth. He tried to touch me sometimes, tried to be intimate with me, and I froze. My body didn't respond, couldn't. How could I let that man touch me, knowing where those hands had been? So he stopped trying, stopped pretending, stopped approaching. And that was somehow a relief, because at least I didn't have to go through the humiliation of rejecting my own husband. Every night I started having nightmares. Nightmares where I saw Robert with Fernanda. Nightmares where they laughed at me. Nightmares where I screamed and nobody could hear me. I would wake up sweating, with my heart racing, and had to pretend everything was fine when my children came to ask if I had had a nightmare. My mother kept coming to visit me during that time. She saw that I was bad, that something was happening, but she didn't ask directly. She was a woman of the era, too. She knew there were things we didn't talk about, knew that a woman had certain duties and that we didn't complain. But once, before she left, she hugged me tight. She hugged me for a time that was too long to be normal and whispered in my ear, "If one day you need to leave, you leave. I support you." Those words stayed with me. I didn't leave at that time. I couldn't. But those words were like a seed, a promise that at least my mother loved me, that at least one person believed I deserved something better. In the last months of those 5 years, I started saving money in secret. I earned it washing clothes for other families and didn't tell anyone. I saved bill by bill, put it in an empty milk can that I hid in the back of the closet under pots. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that money, but I had to have a plan B. I had to have an exit, because I had finally accepted a truth that took 5 years to enter my head. I couldn't live like that anymore. I watched my children grow up in that environment of lies. I saw my Paul becoming more distant. I saw my Marina having to be my mother when she was still a child. I saw my Julius growing up in a marriage that was just an empty shell. And I thought, is this what I want for them? Do I want them to believe that marriage is this? That men cheat all night and women stay home pretending they don't know? That love is this? At that time, I was 45 years old. I wasn't too old to start over, but I wasn't young either. Life was passing. Every day I stayed there was a day I wasn't living. It was a day I was just existing. And after 5 years sleeping in the same bed with that lie, after 5 years seeing Fernanda on the street and having to pretend normalcy, After 5 years destroying myself inside while maintaining a perfect facade outside, I finally reached my limit. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't with screams or scenes. It was just one night, a common Tuesday in 1978, when Robert left for work, and I realized I wasn't going to wait for him to come back. It was a common Tuesday, 1978. I was 45 years old. My children were grown enough to understand certain things, but still too small to not need me. That morning was like all the others. I woke up next to Robert. He was still sleeping. I looked at his face and felt nothing. No love, no anger, nothing. It was like looking at a stranger who slept in your bed. I made breakfast, put it on the table, called the children to eat. Paul was 21 years old and already worked at the textile factory. Marina was 19 and helped at home while looking for work. Julius was 16 and still in school. While they ate, I observed how my Paul had that line of worry on his forehead, how my Marina was too gentle, how my Julius was ashamed to bring friends home. All this because of that environment. All this because I had chosen to stay. After they left home, when it was just me and Robert, he got ready as usual, put on his work clothes, combed his hair, put on that cologne, and looked at me as if I were invisible. "I'm going to work," he said. But I knew it was a lie. At that moment, something changed inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't an explosion. It was a feeling of lightness. It was as if all that lie, all that weight, had finally become so heavy that I couldn't carry it anymore. I felt a quietness, a clarity, as if someone was whispering in my ear, "You don't need this anymore." After he left, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I took that milk can where I had saved my money. I counted every bill. There were $432. It was a small amount, but it was mine. It had been earned with my own hands. At that time, $432 was enough to rent a small apartment for a few months. It wasn't much, but it was something. I started packing a suitcase discreetly. I put some of my clothes, documents, some photos of the children. I hid the suitcase under the bed. My heart beat so hard I was afraid someone could hear it from far away. Then I spent the rest of the day as if nothing had happened. I cooked lunch, cleaned the house, talked to my Marina when she came back from the market. I helped my Julius with homework. I did everything normally because nobody could know yet. That night, when everyone was sleeping, I sat on the living room sofa with a paper and a pen and wrote a letter to Robert. It wasn't a long letter. It didn't have exaggerated emotion. I simply explained that I had discovered about Fernanda 5 years ago, that I saw that situation every day and couldn't live like that anymore, that my children deserved a mother who had respect for herself, that I deserved a life where someone really loved me. I wrote that I was going to leave the house the next day, that he could keep everything, the house, the furniture, everything. I just wanted my freedom. I wrote that I would keep in contact with the children and that they needed a father, so he didn't have the right to not be present. And at the end, I wrote something that surprised me. "You can stay with Fernanda. At least one of us will be able to be honest about what they want." When I finished writing, I put the letter on top of the kitchen table, very visible, and went up to the bedroom where Robert slept. I looked at that man I had shared 18 years of life with. 18 years. And I felt a sadness that wasn't anger. It was pity. Pity for a person who had everything and couldn't value anything. I took the suitcase I had hidden under the bed and went down the stairs very slowly, trying not to make noise. My Julius was awake in the living room, reading a book. When he saw me with the suitcase, he simply knew. Children feel these things. He asked where I was going. I felt the floor disappear from under my feet, but I had to be honest with him. He was practically an adult. He deserved the truth. I sat next to him and explained. I said that Dad and I couldn't live together anymore, that it wasn't his fault, that I was going to be fine, that my children would always be the most important thing in my life, that not everything in life can be fixed, and sometimes we just need to let go. My son cried. He cried that cry of someone who understands everything, but it still hurts, and asked me not to go. He said things could get better. That moment was the hardest of the whole journey, because at that instant I was betraying my children. I was choosing myself over them. But I had to do it, because if I didn't leave that night, I was never going to leave. I hugged my son tight, kissed his head, and whispered that I loved him more than anything in the world, that my leaving was exactly because I loved him, because I wanted him to grow up seeing a mother who respected herself, who valued herself. I left $50 in an envelope on top of the table next to the letter. It was more money than I had saved, but I borrowed from some cents I had earned and saved in another place. I wanted to leave something for my children to help with the bills. When I left the house in that early morning of 1978, I was 45 years old, had a small suitcase and $300 in my pocket. Everything I had in the world. I walked through the city streets without knowing exactly where to go. It was early morning. The city was dark. There were few people on the street. I was a woman alone carrying a suitcase and probably looked crazy. I found a boarding house near the bus station. The owner of the boarding house was a woman of about 60 years, a widow. She lived alone, renting rooms to people who arrived in the city. She looked at me and saw everything. She saw the suitcase, saw the swollen face from crying. She saw a woman who had just made the most important decision of her life. She didn't ask questions, just offered me a small room with an iron bed and a small window. She charged a fair price, less fair than she should have charged. I slept that night holding the suitcase as if it were a baby. I slept and had the first calm dream I had in 5 years. The next day, when Robert woke up and saw the empty suitcase, the letter and the envelope with money, he finally understood that it was real, that I had left. He tried to find me. He went after me, looked in friends' houses, looked for my mother, but I had left word with my Julius, not to reveal to anyone where I was. That 16-year-old boy became my protector, kept my secret as if it were his, and then helped pass information to me about what was happening at home. Through him, I learned that Robert had gone into despair, that he had called a priest to help, that he had called my mother, begging her to bring me back, but I didn't come back. Those first days at the boarding house were the worst and the best at the same time. Worst because I missed my children, as if a part of my body had been torn off. I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming their names. I had nightmares where they needed me and I couldn't reach them. But they were also the best days, because for the first time in 5 years I wasn't living a lie. For the first time in 5 years, I woke up and didn't have to pretend anything. I could simply be. I got a job as a seamstress in a clothing factory. I earned a small salary, but it was honest. I left early, came back in the late afternoon, and nobody asked me about my previous life. I rented a small apartment after a few weeks. It had 1 bedroom, a living room, a tiny kitchen, a tight bathroom. But it was mine. Nobody betrayed me there inside. Nobody lied to me. It was a space just mine. My Marina was the first to come visit me. She was 17 years old. She arrived with eyes red from crying so much, but also with a courage we don't teach daughters. She hugged her mother and said she understood, that she understood I had done the right thing. My Paul took longer to process. He was angry at me, angry that I had abandoned my marriage, angry that I had left my father alone. He was a sexist young man, raised in that era, where man was man and woman should endure everything. But with time, with conversations, with understanding that his father really had been unfaithful for years, he also understood. And 1 week before turning 22, he hugged me and asked forgiveness for having judged his mother. My Julius visited always, brought news, told me how things were, told me that Robert had finally understood that it was real and that Fernanda had gone to live with him. At that time, that news would have broken me, would have made me question everything, would have taken me back to that abyss of doubt and suffering. But at that moment, in my small apartment, with my honest work, with my children finally seeing me as a whole woman and not as a victim, that news simply passed through me, because I had stopped being his wife months ago. I had stopped being the woman he cheated on. I was now just a Zira, just the woman who chose herself and that was enough. The first years after I left home were the hardest and most beautiful years of my life. Hard because I felt like I was walking in the dark, not knowing when the light would return. Beautiful because for the first time in a long time, I was truly alive. That small apartment became my temple. I cleaned every corner carefully, as if I was healing a wound. Every time I wiped a surface, it was mine. Nobody could take it from me. Nobody could deceive me about it. It was just mine. I worked at the clothing factory. I woke up at 5 in the morning, had black coffee that I made myself, and left for work. My salary was small. I earned enough to pay rent, food, and little more, but it was honest. It was earned with my hands, with my work, without depending on anyone. My co-workers didn't know my story. To them, I was just Miss Azira, the older woman who worked quietly in the corner, who didn't talk much, who delivered her work well done. That was all they needed to know. But there was one colleague, a woman named Rose, who was more attentive. Rose was about 55 years old, was divorced too, and had that way of understanding things without us needing to tell. One day, after a few months working together, she simply asked, "You ran away from a man, didn't you?" It wasn't a curious question. It was a question that came from someone who had gone through the same. I looked at her and felt the tears come. For the first time since I left home, I cried in front of someone who wasn't my son. She hugged me, didn't ask for details, didn't ask questions, just said, "You did well. We always do well when we choose ourselves." Rose became my friend, my best friend, the first real friend I had after Fernanda. And she taught me something very important, that there are women who understand other women, that there are people who don't judge you for running away from a lie. At night, when I came back from work, I didn't watch television, didn't read magazines. I simply stayed on my small balcony, looking at the street, thinking about my life, thinking about how I had gotten there, thinking about everything I had left behind. But it wasn't a thought of regret, it was more a reflection, as if I was understanding each piece of my story and putting it in a place that made sense. My Julius started bringing his girlfriends to meet me. At 17, he already had girlfriends who knew his mother's story, and they looked at me with admiration I didn't deserve, as if I were some kind of hero, as if leaving a marriage was an act of extraordinary courage. But it was extraordinary. Because in 1978, a woman didn't leave home. A woman didn't leave her husband. A woman endured, and I had done exactly the opposite. My Marina got a job as a secretary at an insurance company. She earned a decent salary. She started coming home, bringing food I didn't have to cook, and helping with rent. She wanted her mother to rest, but I didn't rest, because resting meant stopping being useful. And I had spent so much time trying to be useful, be good, be a good wife, a good mother, a good friend, that I didn't know how to just be a woman who rested. So I took extra work. Besides the factory, I started sewing at home for clients who looked for me, clothes, curtains, repairs. I spent my nights sewing. My thumb had calluses from using the needle so much. My back hurt from sitting, but I earned extra money. With 1 year of leaving home, I had managed to save enough to put new flooring in the apartment. With 2 years, I managed to buy a used sewing machine. With 3 years, I had furniture I had chosen myself. Everything I bought was a record. It wasn't because I needed them. It was because I could. It was because they were mine. It was because nobody was going to tell me it was too expensive or that it was waste. Robert tried to contact me a year after I left. He sent a message through Julius that he wanted to talk, that he was sorry, that he wanted to try again. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing to talk about. That chapter had closed. That book had ended. I wasn't going back to the pages to reread it. Fernanda started frequenting Robert's house. My children saw this and told me. And you know what's funny? I didn't feel hatred for her. I didn't feel anything for her anymore. She had become irrelevant in my life. Over time, I realized that hatred is something that consumes you from within. It's like keeping a flame that only burns the person carrying it. and I didn't have time to burn from within. I had a lot to rebuild. 3 years after leaving home, an unexpected event changed everything. I received a letter from Robert's lawyer. He had finally agreed to a divorce. That was rare at that time, extremely rare. Most marriages simply ended with death or remained eternally suspended. He didn't ask anything of me. He didn't want alimony, didn't want anything, just wanted me to sign some papers saying I accepted the divorce. I took those papers to a notary, signed each one carefully, and when I left there, I was a legally free woman. I was no longer Robert's wife. I was just Azira. At 50 years old, I had started life from zero. I had a tiny apartment. I had honest work. I had my children who had grown and become adults. I had a real friend in Rose. I had respect for myself. At 52, I received a promotion at the factory. I became production supervisor. I earned more money, had more responsibilities, but also had more independence. Nobody owed me anything. I owed nothing to anyone. At 55, my Marina had her first child, my first grandson, a beautiful boy she named Charles. When I held that baby in my arms, I felt as if all that pain, all that humiliation, all that journey had been necessary to reach that moment, because I looked at that boy's face and promised that he would grow up knowing that women don't need men to be valuable, that women can leave bad situations, that women can rebuild their own life. My Paul married a woman named Cecilia. She was a strong woman, with her own opinions. She knew my story and respected me. They had 2 children, my other grandchildren. My Julius, who had been my protector when I left home, became a man who treated women with respect because he had seen his mother stand up alone, because he had understood that women aren't weak, women are strong. At 65, I retired from the factory. 37 years of honest work. I left there with a party my colleagues threw. Rose was there too, also retiring. I traveled with my retirement money, something I had never done. I saw beaches I had only seen in photographs. I met other cities. I met new people and traveled alone. I traveled without having to ask permission from anyone. I traveled without having to explain to anyone where I was going. I traveled because I wanted to. At 73 years old, sitting here telling my story to you, I can say with certainty, the perfume smell that haunted me for so many years became just a memory. It became just a story I tell. What remained wasn't the betrayal, wasn't the pain, wasn't the humiliation. What remained was the understanding that I was capable of changing my life, that I was capable of being owner of my own destiny, that when one door closes, we can open several others, that when everything collapses, we can rebuild better, that when we choose ourselves, we finally start to live. My Robert died 10 years ago. I received the news through my Julius. He had asked them to give me condolences. I felt sadness, but not for the man he was. I felt sadness for the life he didn't live, for the opportunity he didn't take advantage of, for the woman he didn't value. Fernanda disappeared from my life completely. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know what happened to her, and honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm here. I have 7 grandchildren. I have 3 children who love me. I have a lifetime of stories to tell. I have independence. I have dignity. I have a story of a woman who didn't give up. When people ask me how I managed to leave a marriage at that time, when it was so difficult, when society judged so much, I say the same thing my mother whispered in my ear when I was younger. If you need to leave, you leave. Because it's not about extraordinary courage. It's not about being a hero. It's about valuing yourself enough not to accept crumbs. It's about understanding that you deserve someone who truly loves you. It's about knowing that the loneliness of being alone is infinitely better than the loneliness of being next to someone who doesn't care. That French perfume that came from nowhere became my teacher. It taught me that woman's intuition is real. It taught me that we know the truth long before we have proof. It taught me to trust myself. And today, at 73 years old, with my white hair, my wrinkles, my body that's no longer young, I look back and see a woman who stood up. A woman who chose the pain of starting over instead of the pain of staying. That's my story. A story of betrayal, of abandonment, but mainly a story of a woman who discovered she was much stronger than any lie. And that strength, that courage, that self-love, nobody can take that from me. Folks, before you leave, I want to ask from the heart, like this video, because this story deserved to be heard by many women. Subscribe to the Grandma's Diary, because many stories like this are coming. Stories of women who stood up, stories that need to be told, and leave in the comments where you're watching from, what state you're from, what city. I want to know who's with me on this journey. I want to talk to you down there in the comments. Thank you for listening to my story. May it serve as inspiration for every woman who's living in a lie and needs courage to leave. You are strong. You can do it. I'm living proof of that. Greetings from a grandmother who learned to love herself.